Welcome to the Changing Scripts. That was really funny. Did you see that? I wish I had turned the camera on like 2 seconds earlier. A man literally almost went between me and my camera. Also known as my phone. That was funny. That was funny, right? Okay, yeah. How pretty is this? We're in, hi, welcome to the Changing Scripts YouTube channel. This is part of the Changing Scripts PodTube Experience Part Podcast, part YouTube channel. That's my intro, and I'm sticking to it. Oh, this is pretty too. Maybe I should go over there. This is the Minhang Cultural Park. It's in what some call the Koreatown of Shanghai, China. Yes, there's a Koreatown in Shanghai, and the food here is damn good, which is part of why we come here. And this park has such beautiful stuff, including these, I don't know what kind of flowers these are. Anyway, this is not a nature channel, this is a language channel, and I want to talk to you about the latest interview that was published today with Tanya Crossman, the author of Misunderstood, a book that focuses on TCKs, third culture kids, and their experiences. Yeah, so I have some notes to keep me on track as I'm walking around this gorgeous, gorgeous area. So the first thing I want to talk about is Tanya's identity and her emotional relationship with language. Oh, and if you'd like to hear the podcast that goes along with these ideas that are inspired by the conversation I had with Tanya, look down in the notes, or you can search anywhere that podcasts are for Changing Scripts. It's the only, as of right now, the only podcast with that name. Alright, so first thing is emotional language. At the end of the interview, I always ask people what they think I should ask future guests of the podcast. And she wants to know how people learn the emotional side of the language. When I was teaching language, we would teach people kind of, I would say very overt, very in public emotions, like how to complain in a restaurant, or how to express happiness about an event, and those kinds of things that you would emotionally say to people in those kinds of kind of public environments. But oh no, that's gooey. It's gonna go in that pretty area there, but it's very, very gooey. Anyway, so but what Tanya was talking about, and this is why I thought it was a really good question to add to the list, and just in general when talking about people's language learning stories, is she was talking about like the one-on-one emotional language. When you develop a relationship with someone, and when you start to talk about your emotions and things that someone may have done to, okay, it's getting a little noisy. And when you're talking about the emotional reactions you have to the people that you love and what they're doing, and you want to have those deep down and dirty conversations on how you should act around each other, what you should do, how you feel, that kind of thing, those kinds of languages. I don't have that at my disposal in any language, so I thought it was a really good thing to talk about with folks in their Mandarin Chinese stories, because it will take me literally years to get there. I'm still a one-word wonder when it comes to communicating in a language, and that is not where you are when you have these emotional things. So in future interviews, when it fits into the conversations, I will be asking people Tanya's question about how did you learn the emotional language of, look how pretty that is, the emotional language associated with a certain language. But until that, how about you? How have you learned, and not just Mandarin Chinese, although it's extra points if you do, how did you learn the emotional language of the languages that you've learned to speak? And of course, I can't help but point out anytime I see hanzi characters in a sign form. I don't do walkabout videos anymore per se, but I'd like to show you a little bit of Shanghai. Oh, how fun! A little bit of Shanghai as I walk around the city. The second thing I want to talk about, and the only other thing I really want to talk about, is the difference between reading and understanding. Tanya talked about having, I think she said either 12 or 15 different languages at her disposal, but a lot of those she actually developed and learned to a degree while she was studying at university. And so there's this question of, what is knowing a language? What is knowing a language? What is learning a language? What is being functional in language? There's so many different ways to say or not say if you know a language. And she was saying that Mandarin Chinese is the language that she is the most developed in. I mean, obviously, if she's getting to the point where she's having these emotional, these conversations about emotions and very different things, then clearly that's a very developed part of her identity. But in some of the other languages she was talking about, she can only read this one, or she could read but not necessarily understand this one. And that's something that really, really hit home to me as someone who taught writing both to teenagers and then to later teenagers in a university context, like academic writing context. And to young children when I first started teaching the English language overseas, I heard people talking about literacy, but it didn't quite, like I always thought, as opposed to what? And it really, really wasn't until I started to be able to read Hanzi characters this year, whenever that click happened, I don't remember exactly when, that I really, really understood the difference between literacy and reading comprehension. And I now understand all of those tests I took myself in elementary school that were termed not just reading, but reading comprehension. It's not just can you read the words, but can you understand them? And when do we and how do we distinguish when we're learning a language, when we get to that point where we can not just read what that part of the language is wherever we're reading it, but when we actually comprehend what it is we're reading? When does that happen? How do we know it happens? Do a lot of people even think about it? Because I know a lot of people really, really focus on the spoken part of a language and not necessarily the written part. So I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily even be concerned or care about that part because that's not where their focus is, which is completely fair. But you know me, I want to read. So the difference between being able to recognize versus actually say the characters like out loud versus knowing what it means. And then the next step, which I still haven't really got to on any major level, my husband's taking a picture of me right now, on any major level, is being able to read to a level of fluency and understand what I'm reading without stopping every 2 seconds to look up every single word that's there. So those are the two big things that I really wanted to, how beautiful is that, to talk about in this video. Again, Tanya's podcast, the link to her interview is down in the show notes below. She has a deep, intimate experience with the Mandarin Chinese language. She was born and partially raised in Australia and has a long history of living in other places. But Mandarin Chinese, learning it, using it, being involved with the culture and the language has been a part of her life since she was a teenager. And so she has, as she says, a Chinese identity. And there's all kinds of cultural things that come with how that is received. She lives in Beijing, China, and sometimes people get that, and sometimes it's a little confusing for them. And a lot of times just communication is had and nobody really thinks about it. So, and she goes into that in much more depth and in a much more eloquent way than I can ever tell you when I'm so insanely distracted by all of the beautiful things around me right now, including my husband who's standing right behind the camera. Hi! Anyway, one more shot of the beautiful yellow flowers. We'll just do a quick pan around the park, and now I can't see because that sun has gotten bright. This is one of those rare days in Shanghai when the pollution level is down, the sky is blue, the temperature is beautiful, and it's not raining. This triad, it's mostly 3, because the blue sky just comes with the low pollution. Anyway, those 3 things don't happen that often. And then there's probably a triad I can make in the language sense right now that would wrap this all up incredibly neatly, but instead I'm going to let you think about that. I would like your ideas on not just the literacy part, but the emotional language part. Anything language learning wise, if you even want to just use these videos as a way to check in as your language learning accountability, feel free to post where you are in your languages below. I'd love to keep up with what you guys are doing with your language learning. As you can see, I'm not sharing my language learning in this particular video. I'm just focusing on the really interesting things that Tanya brought up in her interview, and I'll explain all of why I'm doing that in the next video. Dun dun dun. Oh. Anyway, thank you very much, and yeah, I hope you enjoy Tanya's interview, and there'll be another video next week. Sachin!